Okay, welcome to video lecture number 2, part 2, for our discussion of module 12, I believe it is, focusing on the presidency. Yes, module 12. So, we were talking about the powers of the president, and we will start here with an additional power that the president has, which is the power of appointment. And what this means is that the president has the power to nominate all federal judges, not just judges to the Supreme Court, but judges on all federal benches. So, and then those judges do have to be confirmed by the Senate. But that's a significant power because there's a significant number of judgeships. So the president gets to influence all of those empty seats by nominating people who the president supports or the president believes supports them. Another important power is the power of serving as chief executive. So we know that the president, the branch that the president oversees, is called the executive branch. And even though we think of the executive branch as just that one individual, there's an entire bureaucracy that is basically under the supervision and direction of the president. So the president is considered the head of the executive branch, and they have the responsibility of ensuring that the laws that are passed by Congress are faithfully executed. So all of the agencies in the executive branch are meant to help the president to be able to do that, to ensure that the laws that Congress passes are executed, which is where the term executive comes from. So as chief executive, the president has the authority to do a few things. The president can issue what we call executive orders, which you may have heard of before, in order to manage the federal bureaucracy. So these are directives or guidance that the president issues to one of the agencies under their control in order to tell them this is how you need to proceed with regards to your policies, or these are actions that you need to take. Another aspect of being chief executive is important to note that all of the agencies under the authority of the president, the heads of those agencies actually report to the president, and they make up what we call the president's cabinet. So it's a similar idea to the Joint Chiefs. The president is the commander-in-chief in charge of the military, but they do have access to the advice and guidance of the heads of the military. This is the same idea. The president is the chief executive, but his or her cabinet provides them with advice, guidance, additional information, expertise with regard to all the different agencies that the president is supposed to oversee. Moving on, the power of serving as chief of state just means that the president is the symbol of the entire American government. So kind of thinking back to the president's power of conducting foreign relations and representing the United States in terms of hopefully representing all of our best interests when dealing with foreign countries, but also serving as chief of state is important for the president domestically as well. So if there is a national tragedy or if disaster strikes, one of the duties and powers of the president is to serve as chief of state and consider all of the people and try and kind of preside as head of government to provide leadership for all of the people. So it's important internationally, but it's also important domestically that the president keep this role as chief of state in mind. For F, party leader, because the role of president of the United States is actually a partisan position, the president is either affiliated with the Democratic or Republican Party. Theoretically, they could be affiliated with a third party if they won. But that means that because they are occupying the highest office in the United States, that they are considered to be the de facto party leader. Whatever party the president is part of, so in our current situation, our current president is part of the Republican Party, so the president is seen as the head of the Republican Party, the party leader. That means that they have a responsibility to help fundraise for other Republicans. As you saw, President Trump campaigned for certain other Republicans during this recent midterm election. That's part of their expectation and responsibility as party leader. Finally, an additional power of the president is chief legislator. So even though we have our legislative branch and the president does not have the power to make laws, this power serving as chief legislator simply means that there are lots of different ways that the president can influence legislation, even though it's not their job or within their power to actually write legislation. So first and foremost, they influence legislation by offering the State of the Union address. They make this address each January. They make it to a joint session of Congress, so the House and the Senate come together and hear the president give this speech. And in the speech, the president is supposed to raise issues that are important to them, and they're supposed to propose a legislative agenda, basically asking Congress to please address these issues, turn your attention to them, and hopefully write some legislation that then the president would be able to sign. So the State of the Union address is one way that the president acts as chief legislator. Another important legislative tool of the president, though, is veto power. The fact that the president can veto or not sign legislation that comes to his or her desk that they do not agree with. So they can make the request of Congress to pass legislation that they will sign, but Congress and the president all know that the president can also veto legislation that they do not want to sign. And of course, then that legislation can go back to Congress, and if Congress can muster up a 2/3 majority vote, they can override the president's veto, but it's still a power that the president has to threaten to veto legislation. And then finally, if Congress does follow the president's agenda and they do pass legislation that the president wants, in addition to signing the legislation, the president can issue a presidential signing statement. So this is a way that they try to influence the law, because the signing statement usually includes some explanation of why this law is important and how the president thinks it should be implemented. And so that is a significant influence as the law moves from the legislative branch into the executive branch. All right, so moving on to think a little bit about what we call unilateral tools of presidential power. So unilateral means one direction. And the reason they're called unilateral tools is because the president can do these things with no one else's authority or input. They do not have to get confirmation or approval from the legislative branch, nor do they have to get confirmation or approval from the judicial branch. So they are unilateral tools. Multilateral tools means that, for example, going back to that process I just described with legislation being passed, but the president needing to sign it into law, and then the president being able to veto, any of that back and forth dynamic, that's multilateral. These are unilateral tools because the president can do them on their own. So first and foremost is pardon power. This is the president's power to grant reprieves or to delay punishment for a crime if they see fit. So someone who is either accused of a crime or convicted of a crime, the president has the power to pardon them, either to stop their sentence before they finish the entire sentence, or to keep them from being sentenced completely. Another unilateral tool is the executive order. So I mentioned this before, but it's important to note that not only is it a presidential power, and it's one of the ways that the president goes about working as chief executive, but it's also a unilateral tool because it's something that the president can do on their own. So an executive order, as I said, is a directive that's issued to one of the agencies that falls under the authority of the executive branch. And it allows the president to basically adopt policies without legislative approval, because the president gives a directive to one of the agencies that they oversee, and so Congress does not have to get involved with the executive orders. So I included information here about a couple of historical executive orders because it's important for you to understand. One of them is Executive Order 9066, and this was the order that authorized the United States government to intern Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. And what internment is the forced relocation of people of Japanese descent into internment camps, or incarceration in camps, because they were not allowed to leave. So a bit of additional information. Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 about 2 months after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And what that did was it directed the military to relocate all Japanese from their homes into these camps, which were in remote parts of the United States. Some were in Arizona, some in Colorado, some in Utah, some in California. So leaders in the Japanese American community were actually considered to be a threat, and they were actually focused on to make sure that they were interned and taken into the camps especially. And so of the 120,000 or so people who were interned, 70,000 were native-born American citizens, which is important to note. So I have included this video here. It's important for you to watch it so that you have an understanding of what happened to the Japanese people, and you will have a quiz question about it, so it's best for you to watch it in advance and take notes so that you will be aware and informed. Now, I also have information about a more recent executive order, number 13769, which many of us know of as the Muslim travel ban, which was issued by the current president. And in 2018, the Supreme Court upheld this ban. But it's interesting and somewhat ironic that the court, when they wrote their opinion explaining why they supported the travel ban, they referenced the Korematsu versus United States decision, which actually justified the president establishing the internment camps. So even though the Supreme Court they supported the Muslim travel ban in 2018, they went back to say, even though we support this ban, we think that Executive Order 9066 and the Korematsu versus United States court case that came afterwards, which challenged the executive order to say that it was wrong, and the Supreme Court said, no, it's okay to intern these people because the president has this broad authority. It's just interesting that there are similar circumstances, and even though our current Supreme Court supported the current travel ban, they say that the Executive Order 9066 and the Supreme Court case that challenged it was wrong. So watch the video focusing on Japanese internment. And then upcoming, just keep in mind that we will have another video lecture focusing on our last module, the federal courts. And then quiz number 3 will actually open on Sunday, November 11th, and it will close on Sunday, November 18th. It will cover modules 9 through 13. So be sure that you read your textbook, review your outlines, and watch the videos before you take the quiz. You will only have one chance to take the quiz, as with all the others. So make sure you're prepared before you start. And good luck. As always, let me know if you have any questions.